welcome to this brief talk on becoming global climate change advocates. And I'm going to take a slightly unusual approach to this talk. I want to take a very particular entry point, and I'm actually going to start with a little story, if I can get that clicker to work. And the story is one that actually is very fresh in my mind. It was from yesterday, and we were here yesterday at the event. And after the event, I found myself on the tube in London, heading up to Liverpool Street Station to meet a man to obtain a sheaf of wheat, which you see over on the left. And that might seem like a strange mission to do in the middle of London, but I'm going to talk a little bit about why I felt it was, in a way, quite a privilege to be walking through the London Underground with this big bundle of wheat. And I was hoping somebody would ask me, what is that? Because that is a question that has come up a little bit in the last couple of days. And what I would have said, this was where I met the man, outside a very busy Liverpool Street Station, and lost the image again. No, there we go. And this is what I went to get. And the reason why I want to take this approach, and the reason why I thought this was important, was because this wheat is grown in an allotment in Camberwell in London, and it's not your ordinary wheat. And climate change is such a big topic. It's always a question about what the entry point is. And my entry point for today into this whole question about how can we become effective climate change advocates and how can we contribute to climate change mitigation and adaptation. And I say you here because I think we have a part to play in this, and I am going to talk about it in the context of bread. And I'm going to talk about it in the context of bread because we could go into the big picture of climate change, and I'm going to kind of lead us through a little bit of a journey that says I think climate change adaptation and a response can start with our daily bread and how we relate to that whole concept of our daily bread. So you may be aware of Wendell Berry, you may not be aware of Wendell Berry. Wendell Berry is a farmer from Kentucky in America. And he's fairly well known for this statement that eating is an agricultural act. So how many of you here would say that you are agriculturalists? How many of you would say you've got nothing to do with agriculture, for the most part? And Wendell Berry says if you eat, you're connected to agriculture. Eating is an agricultural act. And he writes in this article, The Pleasures of Eating, I begin with the proposition that eating is an agricultural act. Eating ends the annual drama of the food economy that begins with planting and birth. However, most eaters are not aware of this. And they think of food as an agricultural product, but they do not think of themselves as participants in agriculture. And my proposal is that this is a very interesting proposal to think about in the context of bread. At the Royal Agricultural University, we're just working on a new program, and the program is an undergraduate degree in environment, food, and society. Environment, where we might expect to go and study environmental studies or ecology or something to do with biodiversity and all of these subjects that are kind of on the top of the list right now. And that's also because we're increasingly aware that our environment is under a number of stresses. It could be flooding, it could be the fact that we are seeing erosion of our lands, it could be that we're seeing drought, it could be that we're seeing our food crops struggle under increasingly variable conditions. So we have these fairly stark statements about how poor our soils are becoming and how this means that we may only have 40 harvests left or 60 harvests left. The numbers change a little bit, but we do have the idea that part of the crisis that we're experiencing, yes, it's climate, yes, it's everything above us and around us and in the global atmosphere, but it's also very much to do with what's under our feet. And I actually think that even though that's a stark and fairly striking statement, I think we can extend that many, many times over. I think we can have hundreds of years of harvests if we start to think actually about our soils. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to include in this little talk a case study. So I'm looking at bread, and I'm also looking at a very particular context in Devon, and a very particular farm in Devon. And this farm was acquired 5 years ago by Marina O'Connell. And when she arrived, this is what her soil looked like. Now, for many of us, we might just say, that looks like soil, looks like it's something we could grow in. But the person who contracted the land before Marina came said to her, kind of in like a good luck way, that's a miserable piece of land. That was his parting words or handover gesture was, that's a miserable piece of land. Well, yes, and what Marina was very aware of is that before we can start to think of food for ourselves, we actually need to think about how we feed the soil. And in behind us where the Research Institute is and at the Agriculture University, we're increasingly aware that our bread starts in our soils. And the quality of our bread is rooted in the quality of our soils. And Marina, waking up to this 5 years ago, realized that the first thing she had to do was to make her soils go from there to there. That's in 5 years. Over 5 years, she has turned the farm into a farm that is carbon negative. It's highly productive. The soils are very high in carbon matter, very rich in soil biology. And this, to me, is a remarkable case study because for many people who work with the land and with soils, to say that you can do that in 5 years is remarkable, truly remarkable. And that's just the beginning of it. So even though we're talking about food, and I'm talking about soil, we're talking about actually feeding the soil rather than just drawing from the soil, such that that life in the soil becomes the basis for our food crops. That becomes our bread, if you like. And that's where I think Marina has done something very remarkable. So if eating is an agricultural act, one of the things that we explore in this way of studying environment, food, and agriculture, and society, is that it's also a cultural act. Agriculture could or might be, or maybe should be, a cultural act. And in how we eat grows our culture. And I often ask people to say, we have this word agriculture. How does culture feature in our agriculture today? Is our agriculture culturally thriving, culturally supporting? And in what ways is it culturally supporting? So when it comes to society, what we have done to a degree and for very good reasons is we have focused our attention on very particular species and very particular ways of producing those species to go into our bread. And in doing so, for good reason, and we have actually managed to alleviate a lot of hunger in the world through these methods. We have been able to increase our yields significantly through these methods. There's also a little question about to what degree have we hedged or put all of our eggs in one basket. We could say eggs in a basket or wheat in a field. And what we have also done to a degree is focus our attention on very particular elements of that wheat, be it certain levels of gluten and protein, also certain efficiencies in being able to produce a lot of bread very quickly. So we have actually really taken that to impressive lengths, you could say. But surprisingly, if we start to look at food insecurity in the world globally, food insecurity is going up. So does that mean that we need to increase our yields even further? Do we need to actually be able to take what we have achieved over the last 100 years, 150 years, and actually go even further with that? Maybe that's what we need to do, because clearly there's going to be some issues with food. But what we have, why I went across London to get this stand of wheat right here, is because there are a number of people who are saying, maybe actually what we need to explore is diversity. Resilience in the diversity of what is in the soil, resilience in the diversity of our grains. This is called a population wheat. A population wheat is often called YQ wheat. And YQ means, yes, we're attending to yield, but we're also looking at quality. Within that stand of wheat there are some varieties of wheat that will do very well in flood conditions or wet conditions. There are some that will do very well in dry conditions, cold conditions, warm conditions. So in a way, there will be yield, and there is yield on an annual basis, but the yield is responsive to what's happening around us in the climate. The yield isn't dependent on a particular climate. The whole population in the field is able to do some of that hedging, if you like, or wheating on our behalf. And that is actually more than that. That's grown in London in an allotment in Camberwell. It means that it's over time becoming highly adapted to that location. It's becoming a land race. It's becoming localized, contextualized, responsive to its soil community, but also to its climatic conditions. And this is what Huxham's Cross, this is what Marina is also working with. So there's another element here which I think is worth attending to when we start to talk about society. If we start to look at the numbers in terms of how many people were employed in agriculture over time, this to me is a very significant graph. It means that over time, fewer and fewer and fewer and fewer people are involved in agriculture. And that to me there's a lot of different reasons for that. There's a lot of analysis we could do on why that is. But that to me is a shocking graph. Because to me, agriculture is a profound kind of cultural practice. It's also providing food, but it's also the farmer stands right in the meeting point between climate, society, people, environment, nutrition, meaningful work. To me, that's where I would place the farmer, in the middle of that. And the fact that we have fewer and fewer people standing in that place, to me, is a concern. Moving on to this case study, why I've chosen Huxham's Cross Farm is in part because of this picture. To me, speaks 1,000 words. This to me is a picture of how sound agriculture starts with sound soil stewardship. And from that soil stewardship, we start to see abundant production of food in a small-scale farm. This is a small-scale farm, to be able to contextualize that. But what's also very significant to me is one of the reasons that Huxham's Cross Farm is so significant is because Marina's husband is a psychotherapist, and he's developed the Apricot Center so that right in and around the farm and embedded in the farm is a center for well-being, and a well-being for a wide range of people. And that to me is where, not that they are necessarily agriculturalists, but the fact that farms are places for society and for culture and for cultivating our culture is to me something that is also very significant in this context. People have a place in agriculture, people have a place on the farm, and here we're seeing well-being being taken to a very high level in Huxham's Cross and the Apricot Center. So what I'm proposing here is that we can have a very dynamic way to engage with this. I'm a gardener and grower. I'm not so much a farmer, but I'm an educator as well and a researcher. So for me, taking a step in this direction is to start to put some of these pieces together and explore them. Sometimes we're exploring them by taking two of them to say people and food. Can we understand food civilization, how conflicts arise around food, but also how social exchange arises around food? Nutrition and health, food ethics and governance, very important topics to work with. And we're also looking at the interface between environment and food. Is the way that we feed ourselves nutritious, health-bringing, Is it good for our well-being? Is it good for the well-being of the planet? Increasingly is a question that we're aware of and that we're asking. So those are some of the ways that we can look at how those two interface. We can also explore people and the environment and how the way that we interact with our environment is actually our, let's say, investment in the future for a long term, investment in the food, investment in the health of biodiversity, ecosystems, and these are really significant areas to have attention to. The last is to join these up. I would say that this sits in the middle, is we need to have an understanding of the interrelationship between these at a policy level, entrepreneurship level, advocacy and activism. So when I met Andy Forbes at Liverpool Street Station, he for himself, he was crossing London with a bicycle and a cart on the back, hauling a sheaf of wheat. And that to me was kind of an activist approach to a degree. Whether that's what he set out to do, I have no idea. But to me, it was nowadays a statement to say, my mode of transport is bicycle, my cargo is population wheat. And if somebody were to ask me on the tube, what are you actually doing? Or what are you carrying? I realized I would have answered the future. That to me represents something of the future. It's a diverse, resilient, rich genetic stock that is the basis for food, society, and the environment. So I went through the underground yesterday feeling like I had just won $1 million. I'm Canadian, so pounds. I should take it in pounds now if it ever happens, probably. But that's, to me, just a little bit of an overview of how I think we can become become effective climate advocates, and also how we can contribute to climate change mitigation and adaptation is choose your bread. Choose your bread carefully, because in the bread is a route very far out and very far down. So that's what I will offer you for now. And if there's any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Well, brilliant. First of all, thank you very much, Jonathan, for cramming an awful lot of thought-provoking material into a very short space of time there. My wife's a police officer, and I'm really looking forward to telling her that there was an exchange of plant material in London yesterday that was both legal and incredibly wholesome, actually.
Yeah.
A very rare thing.
I would have loved to have met her in that moment. Yeah.
Do we have any questions for Jonathan? Well, I will just kick things off briefly. What struck me about your presentation this afternoon compared to what we heard this morning? This morning we've heard from a series of speakers who were talking about the technological solutions of tomorrow. And they're talking about the research that still needs to be done. But is it fair to say the essence of what you're saying here is we probably already know enough to know where we're going wrong at the moment, and the bigger problem is actually putting that change into practice and getting people on board to do things like the soil improvement that we've seen on Huxton Cross Farm. And the advocates of tomorrow then, they know enough to know that things are bad now, and how are they going to take that positive message out to how they can improve things quickly?
Okay, thank you very much for that question. I think in this whole story, technology is a really fascinating exploration to take, and I actually would like to take that in this program. Because to me, the story of technology in agriculture goes back a very long way. I would say as soon as we developed a scythe as a piece of technology, we changed the way that we could feed ourselves. The moment we don't have to go to very so-called complex technology, but technology and agriculture are interwed. One of the things that I find interesting right now is many of the wheat growers who are growing this kind of wheat, they still have many technological challenges, because in this wheat field, the vetch are growing, the poppies are growing, and they want the vetch because the vetch is fixing nitrogen, but the vetch seed is not wanted in the final product. And an artisan baker that I work with back in Gloucestershire, his challenge is that the last time he got a separator to separate the wheat from the vetch and the other seeds, he got it in France, and it's now sitting in Pembrokeshire and it's not functioning. But there's a technological challenge which still has human engagement, which still has a human component of operation, probably, I would say. So I think you asked a lot in that one question. That's very complicated. But, but I do think that in terms of technique and technology, there's a kind of technological realm to understand the genetics of each strain of wheat that's in that bag. Andy Forbes could tell me everything about every kernel in that bag and its genetic heritage and its specific properties. But at the same time, he's growing that in an allotment in Camberwell and driving around London on a bicycle with a cart on the back. And so for me, I don't know that I'm answering your question, but to me, the whole question of what technologies enhance soil, food, culture, and human well-being, and what technologies challenge our ability to be in touch with our daily bread. I haven't answered it because it's a huge question, but...
Here's a simpler one then. Are you an optimist?
I am an optimist, but I think the phrase I like very much is one that Rutger Bregman uses. Rutger Bregman's an economist, and he says, I'm a possibilist. And I think possibilist is where I would place myself. Possibilist has optimism in it, but it also has awareness that we're not facing small issues right now. We're facing some fairly large challenges. But I am definitely a possibilist, and I am that as an educator, and I am that as a gardener, and I am that as someone who's just interested in the quality of what we eat. So I'll put myself in that camp. Another good question. Thanks.
Well, I'm very pleased. That point you made at the top was so important, isn't it? Sometimes it can feel so crushing that these such big problems, but actually the power to act is in the hand of everyone who eats food.
That, to me, sums up where I would go with the earlier question, is that we don't even have to own land, because nowadays there's lots of different ways that we can land share, or we can have allotments, or we can... and if we improve 1 square meter of soil in the way that Marina does, we're changing the story. I have no doubt. And if we do that on 10 acres or 100 acres or whatever that is, we are changing the story. And I think... So yeah, I think that's where I have possibilist sentiments.
We'll take that phrase home with us. Jonathan, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. Really appreciate it.
Right, welcome. Thanks for coming.